We are live. Hello, Jason Ayres, author of the most brilliant Time Bubble series. How are you?
I'm great. It's nice to speak to you again because I think the last time was when we were in a restaurant eating steak and drinking lots of wine.
We were the last ones out, weren't we?
We were. They probably had to pay the staff for an extra hour that night. So
Maybe they did. I did notice that the girl that was serving us had kind of she'd gone, and we were still in the. Anyway, that's not what we're here to talk
no.
about. We are here to talk about your new novel in the Time Bubble series, Lauren's Odyssey, which I was very privileged to be given a bit of a preview of. Not the whole thing, but some of it. And I was totally hooked immediately. So tell us, how did you get the idea for the Lauren's Odyssey story? Was it some of the stuff that's been happening over the last couple of years, or did you know where you wanted to take it?
Well, it was a mixture of things that I wanted to do, really. The character of Lauren herself is long established. So we initially met her in the first book when she was a teenager. And this is book 13 in the series, and she's actually in her 50s now. And she's always been a bit of a fringe character. She's never had a centrally starring role, and I wanted to do more with her. So, as it often is when I come up with the ideas for books, it's okay, what could we do? And I wanted to explore some of the kind of dystopian science fiction type things that people often think may come to pass, the sort of things we've seen in movies like The Matrix and in Black Mirror, that type of thing. But I didn't want to put it sort of black and white, as in this is what's happened in our universe. So what Lauren's doing in this story is traveling around between different universes on it's a sort of quest. She's got to go to 5 different places and carry out 5 tasks, and it gave me an opportunity to create some other universes. And the section of the book which I sent you is where she goes to another universe which developed similarly to ours, but by the end of this decade, so I think it's 2029, everybody's living in a Chinese style social credit system where cash has been abolished and everything is dependent on people's behavior.
Like Klaus Schwab's dream world, really, isn't it?
It is, and he actually does get a mention. But I like to put these little nuggets into my books. So, of course, a lot of people don't know who Klaus Schwab is. Why would they? He's not really a mainstream figure. But I don't know if you noticed that they all eat these ready meals. That's what everybody eats, that are supplied with, the correct ingredients in, and they're called Schwab's ready meals.
Yes.
They don't they don't have a picture of him on the front of the pack because I think that might put you off your meal. But
Well, he's sort of like a cross between a Bond villain and Jabba the Hutt, isn't he? So looks a bit insect-like himself with his black uniform on, his shiny black, that's sort of beetle-like almost.
yeah, I know. I've seen that one where he looks like the sort of villains in Doctor Who. It's incredible, isn't it? He could be playing the Master or some arch enemy.
It's like fancy dress. I mean, I don't know
Yeah,
what he's wearing. People probably don't even realise what we're talking about.
no,
Jason, take us right back to the beginning of the Time Bubble series and how you got the idea, and then come back to Lauren's Odyssey, and because it flips backwards and forwards, doesn't it? The whole series.
yeah. I mean, yes, we'll come back to Lawrence Odyssey because there's so much to talk about. But I have always loved writing, and I used to spend my teenage years at school. Myself and another friend, we used to write these plays in exercise books, humorous things based on what was going on around the school. Yeah, it was at the sort of school where they had like magazines and things that you could contribute to, and it was just kind of a fun thing. But I sort of regret in a way that I didn't follow it up further at the time because I didn't do English language or literature at A level, which I could have done because I didn't really see writing as a career choice then. It was just more a fun thing to do. So I went off into marketing, market research, and all through those years of working his career, I was still sort of doing odd bits of writing here and there, contributing to various newsletters, even work related stuff, writing for magazines. But it never really went away, and I always had a very creative streak. Really, I loved sort of a lot of the science fiction authors that I grew up with, people like John Wyndham, who wrote Day of the Triffids, that sort of thing. And I was always coming up with these sort of ideas of like, what would happen if I could travel to an alternate universe, or if I could go back and see what this place was like 50 years ago, or all these sort of scenarios started to developing in my head, and I never really sort of did anything with them until later on. So it got to I guess about 10 years ago, 10 to 15 years ago, and people were I noticed people were starting to be able to self-publish their own work, and a lot of people were doing very well. They hadn't gone to traditional publishers at all. They were putting it out through the various platforms that were springing up. So all of there was obviously Amazon Kindle, Barnes and Noble, and Google, and everyone else publishing books that anyone could do, and that's what sort of piqued my interest and inspired me to write the first book.
It was the right time, wasn't it? Everything sort of converged to enable you to start doing that, I guess.
Yeah. And
what were you doing at the time? What were you working as at the time?
Okay, so I had finished working at Nielsen by then, which was the company I've worked at for a long time. I then worked in various other jobs in the industry for a few years, but my heart wasn't really in it, and I was doing all sorts. I was kind of, sort of making a living any way I could, because I'd always done I've been very much into my music, so I always done a bit of DJing on the side, and I sort of stepped that up. So I was going off doing. I mean, it was the sort of cheesy end of DJing, really. Weddings and things like that. But it worked out very well when the kids were little, because I used to look after them in the day, and then Friday, Saturday, Sunday nights I'd be out doing these weddings or karaoke nights, or you know even 80th birthday parties, whatever I could go, really, which paid quite well. And also, I was sort of working as a freelance journalist, I suppose you could say, in the loosest sense of the word. It was mostly writing columns for magazines and newspapers, which it's bread and butter, but it gets you through. But of course,
Yes.
with so I worked for the Oxford Mail for quite a long time, and
Were you freelance or were you employed by them?
I was freelance, but
Freelance.
they took a column from me every week for a year or two, which was good, and odd bits and pieces in other magazines as well. But of course, when you do that sort of work, you only get paid for it once,
And
so
it's a bit hand to mouth, isn't it, when
it
you're doing it
is.
like that? Yeah.
So I would, I'd be doing, okay, so, write 500 words to Oxford Mail, 50 quid, go out and do somebody's 80th birthday party, 150 quid, and it was just getting cash in here, there, and everywhere to sort of get by. Well, yeah, but of course the kids were little, and they did benefit from having me around probably a lot more than most kids' fathers are. So,
Yeah.
but I knew that wasn't going to be enough. It was great when they were small, but of course, then they got started to get a bit older and started going to school. So I thought, well, what am I going to do now? And I'd already sort of two or three of these books I'd written bits and pieces down for them years ago, and I thought, okay, I need to start working out how to do more with this. And like I say, you only get paid once for a newspaper article, but I figured if I could write a good book and get it up online where people could download it electronically, in theory, the number of times you can sell it is endless. So that was what I was looking towards, and and I sort of built it up from there.
You've got a very entertaining writing style. It's I've said before, I think it comes across, it's quite Red Dwarfy in its pace and its humor, and but actually the more I've listened to it, it's also very reminiscent of James Herbert, who I used to read a lot when I was younger. The way you knit stories together, and the way you knit characters together, and then sort of you drop them like a stitch, you sort of drop them and then pick them back up, and it all weaves together really well.
Yeah, and if you read the whole series, you'll come to appreciate that part of it even more, because within one book they all weave together, but then they cross over between all the different novels, and not necessarily in order. Something might happen in book 4 that links up to something in book 9, which is great if you're a really avid reader who picks up on every detail. But if you're just a casual reader, it doesn't matter either, because when you get to book 9, you don't need to know that happened in book 4. So it
No, but
works
it's very clever because you want to, and that
yes. Yeah,
it's a very clever marketing ploy as well. You're like, oh no, now I need to go and get that book, and I need to read about that one.
yeah. Well, it didn't sort of start off that way. I didn't sort of sit down, well, nearly 10 years ago now, and okay, I'm going to write a 12-book series. It was initially it was just to write one book. So if anyone that reads the first Time Bubble book, it's a complete story in itself, with well, I'm not going to put a spoiler in, but the conclusion of the book, what happens on the final page, is about as final as you can possibly get in terms of our world. But so
how did you get so you wrote that as like an intact novel in itself? So how did you get the idea for the second book?
Well, this is what tends to happen. I was so in the Time Bubble, what happens is people are spontaneously thrown forward in time. So most of the book deals with happenings over a small period of time, like a couple of weeks. But later on, I start to explore people going further into the future, like years ahead. And I already had this idea, because the second book basically deals with a climate disaster.
The global cooling,
Yes, which I thought was a good title, because it was the sort of antidote to global warming, which everybody was talking about at the time, and still is. And I'm thinking, okay, what if something unexpected happened and suddenly the world got colder instead of warmer, which is something that's been done in before. I mean, the film The Day After Tomorrow is an obvious example.
And we are actually in a solar minimum, aren't we? So
yes.
Although they're going on about, well, it was global warming and then they changed it to climate change, but there's plenty of science around to say that we are actually going into a cooling phase. So
yeah. So I wanted to explore that, and I was putting the idea together for this book where this would happen. I think, okay, let's make this happen a bit in the future. So you have to remember, I was writing this back in 2014. So interestingly, the Time Bubble is set in 2018. So it was in the future when I wrote it, but is now in the past. But the idea with global cooling was, okay, so something's going to happen in 2029. What's that going to be? While I was still writing the Time Bubble, towards the end of it. So there's a scene in the Time Bubble very close to the end of the book where one of the principal characters, who's jumping forward in time, turns up in 2029, and he's inside like an underpass railway tunnel, and he can't get out because it's frozen solid at both ends, with no explanation given in the first book as to why that might be. He just jumps on forward in time to a period where it's melted again. But that was like a sort of teaser for the next book that I knew that I was going to write. So the next book, you actually find out what happened to cause that situation. And what I wanted to do in global cooling was explore what happens to society when everything breaks down. So we've got this astronomical event, which was based on a real thing, actually. There's an asteroid called Apophis, which is destined to fly by very close to the Earth in 2029, but it's meant to miss us by a small margin. But what I did was threw a random element into the works by having a comet, the previously unknown comet, coming in at the same time, smashing into the asteroid and directing it into the path of the Earth, where it hits the Earth, chucks a load of ash and dust up into the atmosphere, much as has happened in the past, and it
Well,
just
like
makes
the Taurid meteor shower, we go through that. Is it twice a
yeah.
year? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even things like when Krakatoa erupted in the 1880s, it lowered the temperature of the Earth by
Yes.
a degree or two for a couple of years.
Yeah.
So
Well,
what
like
happened?
that. Oh, sorry. Carry on. No, carry
Yeah.
on.
So what happens in global cooling is this thing happens, and then a few months later, the temperature plummets so much that you know we've seen Britain grind to a halt with a couple of snowy days in winter on a regular basis, but this is like nothing that has been seen before, and you get to the point where nobody can travel anywhere, the electric's gone off, and people are starting to break into supermarkets and fighting over food and sort of splitting up into marauding groups, and I wanted to kind of get across the message that we are so helpless as human beings generally because and this was a line I put into the book which a couple of people picked up, is that we know collectively how to do everything but individually nothing, because
Yes.
that's how society works. And I've said this before, like if say an electromagnetic pulse or solar flare fried the whole Earth's electricity grid, that would pretty much be the end of civilization as we know it. Whereas if it had happened 300 years ago, probably nobody would even have noticed.
No, and this is why, in a lot of ways, what's happened over the last couple of years, those of us that are sort of have got a bit of an idea, and let's face it, none of us have got a real idea about what they, in inverted commas, might be up to. We've kind of realised, haven't we, that we need to, as Max Egan says, get in touch with those skills that we've lost because we look like we're going to need them.
Yeah, and I link that to the later books. So when we do come on to talk about the new book, you'll recall that there's a commune that they formed outside of society.
Yes, it reminded me very much. Have you read The Chrysalids, John Wyndham?
Yes, I've read all of his books.
Yes, it
Yeah.
reminded me of was it Zealand, wasn't it?
Yes, no, I think
Where
it was meant to be New Zealand was the
yes, I think so.
implication, that was
Yeah.
the only place that had escaped the Holocaust or the nuclear Holocaust.
Yes, whatever it was that had happened,
Yeah,
it reminded me so much of that, the Badlands, or the people were,
yeah,
who were in the Badlands, the sort of those who had not been excluded from society necessarily, but excluded themselves.
yeah. So
Yeah.
it was interesting because it did sort of predict to some extent. Obviously, the best feedback that I get is from people leaving reviews on the books on
There are some
Goodreads.
great reviews, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, on Goodreads and on Amazon are the two main places where people leave them. But the global calling, sort of 2 or 3 years ago, when the whole COVID thing started, a couple of people put reviews up, sort of mid 2020, saying, "Oh, this is this is just like what happened when." The COVID panic started, and everybody was bulk buying toilet rolls, and people, and it was
Mm.
all. Do you remember that period? It was that they were sort of making comparisons, and then saying, what's happened this year, with COVID, it just shows you how easily like something like this could happen. And I was quite pleased because it was like something I had written had resonated with people to something that was happening in the world now. Now, obviously, the COVID thing didn't turn out to be anything as bad as some people were predicting it would be at the start. But you could imagine that if a really bad virus did hit the world and, wiped out 50, 60, 70% of the population, that society would break down in that way. And in fact, there's a very good, I don't know if you've ever seen it. It was a 70s TV series called Survivors, which is
No, but I know Paul. Carmichael and
Yes,
Michael Livesley on Nice Things mentioned that quite a lot, and I'm thinking I must
they
get
did.
that series and watch it.
They did do a whole episode dedicated to it, but it's something you can get on DVD, and it's also on BritBox for anybody that's got that. So I'd certainly recommend that, because it was very sort of stark and raw and not sensationalist, just trying to depict what would actually happen, which is what I try and do in my books. I'm not writing an action movie. I don't need explosions and guns and all this drama. It's just like, what would actually happen?
It's kind of extrapolating things to their sort of nth degree, really. It's sort of, I think if you've got any sort of imagination, you can think, okay, so that happens, and then what would happen from, well, that's going to happen after that happens. So it's, you kind of, hello Nathan, nice to see you. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, so I think you've got any kind of imagination, you can kind of track, you can almost see the stepping stones unfolding before you, can't you? And think, well, this is the conclusion that we're going to come to if it carries on in this way.
Yeah. So that was probably the darkest of my novels, I would say. And then from there, as we sort of went on it, they all sort of developed from there. And I explored different characters and different scenarios. A lot of them come from a sort of what if perspective.
Exactly, the what ifs and all those different, well, there are various various ways you can take it, I guess.
Yeah. So like one of the things in the first two books is about people, being, going forward in time while everybody else is left behind. So I've got when we got to the third book, it's like, okay, so I've got this guy, and it's established in the first two books that he was inadvertently thrust 22 years forward in time without knowing about it. But I haven't really dealt with that in the first two books. So what am I going to do with that? So then I thought to myself, okay, what would happen if that happened to me? If I sort of went through some portal, and so where are we now? We're in 2022, and it's then 2044. And didn't even realize at first it had happened. I mean, you'd be walking on the street, things might look different, but then you go round to your house, you open the front door, and there's a different family living there.
Yeah.
And where's your family gone? And everyone thinks you're dead. You disappeared 22 years ago. They assumed you'd been murdered and all this sort of thing. And then you've got the fact, well, okay, I'm here, but how am I going to explain the fact I don't look any older? Yes. And I've been declared legally dead. And I had it in this book that they had gone over to gone over to use the euro, which I don't think would probably ever happen here. But at that time, this was written again pre-Brexit. So and it was set in a different universe to us, but I was just exploring what things could change. So the currencies changed, everything's changed. And this guy, he's saying, I'm from that time, but everybody thinks he's mad or crazy or impersonating someone that's died, and he has a really bad time. Not that it matters, because he's a pretty horrible character anyway, who was one of the main villains in the second book. So I kind of wanted to give him a hard time.
Well, so many things that, I mean, I've only sort of caught up with the first three, really. And if anybody wants to go and have a listen on your YouTube channel, you can have it's about half an hour, isn't it, of each, like a taster of each book. They are great. You will get hooked. You'll need to go and read them all.
Basically, you can give as part of the contract with Audible, who are the audiobook people, you are allowed to share up to 10% of each book free of charge. So some of these audiobooks run to, some of them 6-7 hours. It's amazing how long an audiobook is. So they're sort of between 30 and 45 minutes of each book on my channel, which is called The Time Bubble.
Yeah. And so I've been listening to them on there, and as I said, I want to listen to them all now. But some of the things that you've included are just so prophetic. Like in book 3, where you mention it sort of mentions Australia in that first half an hour on the audiobook, and how they've got all these solar panels in the outback. And there's I'm thinking, was it in an earlier book where you were talking about weather manipulation? Was it Hannah?
No, it's
no, not Hannah.
Yeah, Kaylee. She becomes a meteorologist and works for the Met Office. And what happens in Australia is that it escapes the black winter, is what the global winter is called. I sort of got inspired by the Black Death. So that the devastating winter kind of more or less wipes out the northern hemisphere for a while, and but Australia in the southern hemisphere survives it, and they become sort of a world power. And at the same time, they are looking at weather manipulation, because we all probably many people know about the idea of seeding clouds with iodine and all this sort of thing. I was thinking, okay, so Australia, they've got all this civilization around the outside on the coast, and they've got this great big area in the center which is pretty much uninhabitable. There's nothing there, no infrastructure. So what can they do with it? So let's say they can use some advanced terraforming type technology to make it fertile, and then how are they going to power it? So okay, it's a very hot country, so they would get a lot of solar energy, which would be pretty unlike here in Britain, whereas we're trying to rely on solar and wind when we can't be sure that the sun's going to shine or the wind's going to blow. I think solar panels in the centre of the interior of Australia would be pretty reliable. So
That sounds very sensible.
yeah, so effectively, when I think of it, I get images in my mind. So when you make a jigsaw puzzle and
Yes.
you do the outside first, well, that's kind of like Australia in a way, because they're all concentrated around that coast. So and then, okay, we're going to fill in the middle. So Australia becomes this amazing, prosperous country with all this stuff there, and people live in the middle. And it's I don't know. It's just a flight of fancy, really. I think, okay, so what could happen, and okay, that could happen, that could happen, that could happen, and then it all ends up in the book.
But it does sound. But the thing is, that idea just does sound really. It does sound really sensible, because you're right. The outback is kind of fairly empty. It's really hot, which is why it's so empty. So solar panels, and then you can see how it would become like Dubai. Have you heard of there's a I think it's an Australian company. They're called WeatherTech. They are actually manipulating the weather.
Yeah.
Yes, and it actually on their website it actually says advanced tech to enhance precipitation. So, in your head or in the book, because I haven't got that far into the book, how does Australia manage to avoid the black winter? It wasn't through weather
Okay.
manipulation.
No. Well, what it's all to do with the seasons. So, what it's to do with the time of year. So the asteroid thing happens in in the northern hemisphere for a start, and it happens in the first in sort of April May time. So it's coming into our summer. So it's actually, and it takes a while for the effect. The dust goes up there, but it takes a few months for it to filter around the world and for the global temperatures to start to drop. So what happens is it gets to around the time of year we're in now, October, and suddenly the global temperatures have fallen. So what happens is it's October, November here, and suddenly we're plunged into the temperature, absolutely freezing cold temperatures. So there's already several feet of snow on the ground by the beginning of November. Of course, it gets colder in Australia too, but because Australia were just coming into their summer, um, imagine that you take an average of 10 degrees off our temperatures here, you're going to end up with that freezing situation. Well, in an Australian summer, it's 30, 40 degrees anyway. So if you take 10 degrees off, okay, they're going to have maybe a crap summer that's going to be like a British summer, when we have a rainy year. But it doesn't affect them because of the time of year. And what happens in the book is that, after that first year, things start to come back. So by the time the Australian winter rolls around and our spring comes around, okay, so we have a few years of really awful weather, but by the following summer, things are starting to come back here. But in Australia, it never happened. And of course, what you also get is a lot of migration. So people flee south, and a lot of people would sort of end up there.
Where do you get the inspiration from? In my head, I'm seeing you doing what I do, which is sort of scanning the news, and there's a story that interests you, and maybe you sort of magpie that bit and put it away? Or do you get your ideas from some of the science fiction, or something, not science fiction, but science fact stuff that you read in the news? Or do you actually get an idea and then go and research it yourself?
It's a mix of all those things, really. I look at things that are happening, and things that people are saying. I'm probably in the earlier books, it was coming more from me, and then I was researching. But I guess I'm becoming more reactive to things that are happening now because so much has been happening. So, for example, I've always liked science fiction. So there's the show Black Mirror, which paints a lot of sort of dystopian scenarios. There's been, everything from, Star Trek, Doctor Who, all those things, all the book series I've read, they all deal with, there's a lot of common themes. I mean, the idea of authoritarian control is one, notably, with things like Brave New World, 1984. I mentioned the Matrix earlier. Um, they, it's interesting because of what a lot of things that have happened in the world. We're starting to hear more about moving to a cashless society, and there is a lot more pressure on people to conform to certain ideologies, and it just sort of starts to feel to me that 10 years ago I considered those books and films very far-fetched. Now I look at the world and I think, you know okay, they probably it's still in the realms of science fiction, but we are moving closer towards that. It wouldn't be so unbelievable now if it happened as it maybe would have been 10 years ago.
I'm exactly the same. I read 1984 a long time ago, and then I don't know what I did with my copy, but I found another copy in a bookshop. Gosh, a few months ago now. Well, actually, probably about a year or two ago. Actually, it might have even been before COVID, to be honest, because I don't think
Yeah.
I would have bought it otherwise. But I opened it up to read it, and I just thought, oh my God, because as you said, when I read it when I was a lot younger, it did seem so far in the future and just completely sort of unbelievable almost, even though Orwell had written it way before my time. But I just thought, oh God, I can't. This is like I'm reading about our lives now, or our
Yeah.
lives almost now, and it kind of takes us back to Lauren's Odyssey in a way, because when I read that excerpt that you sent me, that extract, I was reading it, and in my head, I knew it was science fiction, but I just thought we're just on the next stepping stone. Well, we're one behind, and just that one stepping stone into the future, and that's where we're going to be. And it was quite scary.
Yeah, and I think it's the technology that is the danger. And I don't think the technology is advanced enough yet for what happened in that book to happen. But we've seen indications in a lot of things that in society. For example, the idea of the usage of apps on mobile phones, and the fact that we've all got these phones, and the idea that you might need to show something on a phone to, to get access to a venue for whatever reason. Which, some people might say, oh, okay, that's just a more electronic version maybe of showing your driving license to prove that you're 18 to get a drink in the pub, or such like. But I just looked at the way that this was going, and it concerned me. I mean, I'll give you sort of a mundane example. I don't like the idea that everything that we do can be tracked, traced, and recorded, which is one of the reasons why I endeavour to use cache at all opportunities, so as not to leave a particular trail, because there's this feeling that it's all perfectly innocent. You say, well, uh, why would anyone want to know the ins and out of your daily life? But I think things could be, used. If your bank manager can see every tiny detail, everywhere you've been, what you do. They can sort of build up a picture of you. And I could give a couple of examples, really. I mean, one of the things that I am not keen on are the loyalty cards in the supermarket. So Tesco have something called a club card, which I'm sure most people are familiar with, where
I used to have one.
yes,
When I
well,
lived in Oxford, really.
the initial idea of the club card, and I do feel qualified to talk about this because I worked at Tesco head office at the time that it was launched in the marketing department. From the customer's point of view, was that it was like the old Green Shield stamps that you used to get in the co-op. You would just scan your card each time, and you got something like a penny for every pound that you spent, and then you'd get some vouchers to give you money off your shopping. And so every 3 months you'd get a tenner off that week, which
Well, I
seemed
think it
really.
was a genuine loyalty
Yeah,
device at the time, wasn't it? It was to make sure, because there were lots of other supermarkets springing up, and there was lots of competition around, and it was to make sure that you were being encouraged to shop at that particular supermarket. So I do think, like a lot of these things,
yeah,
their initiation does come from a fairly benign
yeah.
starting point initially.
It's always a good idea at the time, but of course, what they were getting now for the first time was information on their individual consumers. So what happened with a club card after a while was you started to get some additional vouchers with your statement, which would be for products that you regularly bought. So it's like, okay, you might buy a particular brand of butter or whatever, you'd get an extra 50p off that. So again, it all seemed a good thing to do. But then as time's gone on, it's just become sort of more and more pervasive. So how Tesco works now, I mean, I don't shop there very often, but they have a two-tier pricing system. So you get the regular price and the club card price. So the club card price, so if something normally costs £1, that'll be the club card price, and then the regular price will be sort of double. So it's almost like rather than it being a reward now, it's a punishment for people that don't have it.
Exactly. Well, that's the era we're slipping into, isn't it? And I've been saying for a while, I stopped having a club card probably about 10 years ago now. I started to, I think that's about when I went down the rabbit hole about 10 years ago. But do you remember? It's around the time that it was mooted that the National Health Service was going to have a national database, and you'd be able to, it doesn't matter where you were in the country, if you broke your leg in Scotland, but your GP was in Cornwall, then they could just get your details up in Scotland and everything would be great. And there were lots of people going, hang on a minute, that doesn't sound right. And we all knew that the NHS was really bad at keeping hold of data. They'd lost some massive files, and all of that had been happening. And if you didn't want to go on this database, you had to opt out. You had to contact your GP, you had to fill in a form and give it to your GP and opt out. And just before all of that happened, or around the same time in the press, there were things being mooted about how your health could be linked to your diet. And how would they do that? Oh, well, they just have to look at your loyalty card in the supermarkets. But at the time, all of this was very disparate and it wasn't joined up at all. And then it all died a bit of a death. But something stuck with me. And that's the time that I stopped using my loyalty card at the supermarkets. I just thought, no, I'm not going to do that any longer. And at the same time, I went and deregistered from my GP in Oxford as well. And I'm so glad that I did all of that, because here we are now.
Yeah,
And things are a lot more connected because they've got the technology and all of those things. What I found over the years is something. It's like the idea that they have to tell you what they're going to do. This is one of the things that we know. They have to tell you what they're going to do, so that then they've told you, and if there's no pushback, then they can just go. It kind of absolves them of any sort of bad karma, I think is one of the things that is said. So you get these things, they mushroom up in the press, and there's a big furore about it for a while, and then it dies a death. But there's been a lot of this has happened over the past few years, and when something happens like that and then it dies a death really quickly, that's what piques my interest, and that's what makes me go, okay, they're telling us something there. They've given us some information, and then they've dropped it all, and then quietly behind the scenes they're kind of fitting it all together.
yeah, and I think this push towards everyone having a phone and using apps for everything, because it's becoming almost impossible not to have one. And if you get to this situation where every single thing that you do, from parking your car to buying a drink in a pub to getting admission to a football match, or anything like that, is dependent on you having your phone and you having the correct app and the privileges to be able to do those things, it's not difficult to extrapolate to a point where you get to effectively computer says no.
Well, we had that last year, didn't we, under COVID, where we had that period where you couldn't go into a restaurant or a cinema or a theatre or wherever it was you wanted to go without having the QR code. Now, a lot
Yes.
of places, I have to say, were not into, nobody checked, so we would just kind of pretend that we were doing it. But in the end, I just thought, I don't even want to do that. I don't even want to pretend that I'm doing it, because it's still supporting it in a way. And the only way to not support it is just to say clearly to whatever establishment it is that you're going to, that you're not happy to support a
Yeah.
place that is going down that road. I don't know how much power businesses have to push back, though, because they so cleverly bribed everybody. When the first lockdown happened, it was obvious that all this furlough money was about bribing people, because who doesn't want a lovely summer off, swanning about doing nothing and getting loads of what they thought was free money from the government? So that was everybody, businesses, all the loan payments, the cheap loan payments that they gave out to people. I mean, a lot of businesses like pubs struggled, and quite a few have closed down now, but they bribed everybody. This is how they do it. It's either money or it's convenience. And the way they are getting everybody with the apps is convenience. Oh, you just have to wave this over and you're in. It's
Yeah.
fine. And what a lot of people aren't doing, because it's a conspiracy theory, is putting two and two together. And even if, let's say, it's not even a conspiracy theory and that's not what they're up to, what happens when there's no energy? What happens if the database goes down? What happens if, and it has happened, where you can't use your credit card in a shop because their system isn't working? They don't seem to be thinking things through, even in a basic way.
No. But people, if they're sold on the convenience and that they can save money, will usually accept these things. And I can't help feeling that that whole thing about, I mean, the NHS pass that they spent supposedly £37 billion on, which seems an incredible amount to me. I can't help thinking that some of that money is actually being used to build a future system, not
Oh,
for
that's
you.
exactly what
Yeah,
they've used it for. But
yeah,
everyone's saying, where did that 37 billion go?
yeah,
Hello, have a little
s-
think.
yeah. So
You
it's
honestly think it's gone on a failed track and trace system?
exactly, yeah. I think that the opportunity was taken to explore if people would sign up to this idea. And of course, by having, the fear from the pandemic, which was quite endemic in a large amount of the population, it was quite easy to get people to comply to doing that. Now, um, in the future, they might want us to do it for other reasons, but the idea that it can be done is there now. But I personally don't think the technology is ready, and that is my great hope for at least the short to medium term.
Well, my
I
other
don't.
half, who works in tech,
Yeah.
says it's not. He said they're nowhere near ready. All of
No.
their silly IT schemes go down the pan. They're saying this to the public, but actually behind the scenes, the technology just isn't there.
No. But they're getting people used to the idea that it will be one
Exactly.
day, and
Exactly.
which is what a lot of these shows are about. So, um, moving on to to the book, I what I did really there was, okay, let's again look forward a few years and assume that the technology comes along. How would we get from where we are today in 7 years? Because again, this is set in 2029, but before the winter event from the other book. Uh, what would the world look like, and how did we get there? So that's where we got to the point in the book. So the bit where I said that to you starts at chapter 9. So she's already been on the adventure. And what happens is she transports from world to world. So she literally is teleported into her own body in this other universe. and she arrives and she doesn't know what to expect, which is where what you read begins.
How did I don't know if you obviously, I think you must have thought of the backstory in your head, if it's because I haven't read the whole book yet, obviously.
Yeah.
How did they sell that style of living in Lauren's Odyssey, that WEF style of living? How
Okay.
did they sell that to the public? How did the public in that future world get to that point? What were the steps to get to that point?
Okay. Well, I'll explain sort of what the place was, the world was like, and then I'll have to sort of answer that in stages, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So just to say what happens. So she turns up and she wakes up and she's in bed and she's in a flat. So she doesn't really know where she is or what's happening. It's really, really cold is the first thing she noticed in the room. And everything is bland and featureless, but there's just this logo everywhere of these three concentric circles. So she gets up and then she realizes that there's somebody else in the flat, and her boyfriend's there, but it's not a boyfriend that she's ever met before because this is a different Lauren in a different universe. And they have a sort of brief chat, which to start off with, she thinks, oh, he seems okay. And then she's moaning about it's cold, and the first thing he sort of says was, effectively we aren't, we're not allowed to have heating on in the daytime because, and she's like, oh, sort of, why is that happening? And it turns out that it's because they're not rated high enough. So the first thing
Social
is
credit scoring
yes.
system. Yes.
So the first thing that sort of is established is that they have points. They also have everything in the flat is done for them by a device called Ellie. So probably not too difficult to think where I got the inspiration for that from. So you basically say Ellie, open curtains, this sort of thing. So she's in the flat and she looks out the window, and basically she's in a tower block in London, and there's just a series of these featureless white tower blocks that are all the same. And she sort of has this discussion with her boyfriend, and they start having an argument because he wants them to be able to go on holiday. They're allowed to go abroad once a year if they are above a certain rating. Everyone's rated out of 10, and her rating is too low. And it's because she's not really conforming with a lot of stuff, and he is. And so, in terms of to answer the first part of your question, how did they get people to agree to this? Well, everything they say or do, they get positive or negative points for. So in a way, it's almost going back to the whole club card type idea. People aspire in the same way that in a capitalist society people aspire to earn more money, to have more possessions. Well, these people don't have possessions, they have a status. So they get points by basically doing the right thing.
By behaving themselves.
Yeah.
But how did they get to
So
the point? Because I'm thinking,
yeah.
if I mean, it's interesting because the baby steps are happening now, aren't they? Because we've got the latest thing from Liz Truss about we'll pay people £10 a day to only turn their. You can see where this is going. So it is baby steps, but how? Because if she turned around tomorrow and said, right, everyone, because energy is so where is some at the moment? What we're going to do is we're going to give everybody 50 energy points. And you need to, it's obviously hooked up to your smart meter, but which we don't all have, but that's another story. So I could kind of see how if we got to the end of this year and we'd had some blackouts, and she could turn around and say, okay, 50 energy points for everybody, and it's up to you when you use them and how you use them. But when you get down to 5 energy points, you need to know that your energy is going to be cut off. So I can see how that would happen with energy even this year, to be honest. I get did it happen in baby steps to get them to the point where they're accepting things like caffeine-free coffee in a coffee shop?
Okay, so I'll explain the event that led to it. So generally they had been having an increase, like what we're experiencing now of cash being phased out, all that sort of thing. But then in the summer of 2024, there was a general election and a new government elected. I don't detail who the government was, but
That's frighteningly close.
yes. So, and not long after the new government was elected, similar to 2019, a new pandemic breaks out. So, and as you can imagine, panic ensues. But this time, um, the virus is spread entirely by animals. So that I was kind of inspired. You remember we heard a lot, sort of about swine flu, bird
Yes.
flu, all
Yeah.
this sort of stuff. So
Bat flu.
it starts off in China because that's where they always seem to start off. And it's a strain of flu in chickens. But then, all the media is saying that it spreads to cattle. It goes around. It sort of happens over 2 or 3 months, like, the beginning of COVID. And, it's doesn't seem that serious at first. And it sort of gets ramped up. And then there's a media frenzy. And there's a lot of little sort of nods to things that happen in our world. So there's a prominent unnamed London college with an expert who produces a computer model that suggests that 5 million people in Britain will die if all meat consumption isn't stopped immediately. So the message that's put across is that anybody that eats meat, and again, that do you remember the BSE thing?
The BSE thing, and
so
then we had
similar,
the what was it called, foot and mouth, where they actually destroyed loads of cattle. So that would have reduced the meat.
So what happens is that all the meat products are taken off the supermarket shelves straight away. It becomes illegal to keep meat. So there was, there's some people who saw it coming and filled up their chest freezers, but that doesn't do them any good because the police come breaking down doors if they're suspected of having it, and their neighbours are encouraged to sort of snitch on them. Even keeping animals of any extent is illegal, and sort of some people people start speaking up about it, and they are ridiculed and ostracized for it. And then there's a lot of deaths in hospitals are put down to people eating the meat, and effectively all the livestock across the whole world is slaughtered, and the meat industry it effectively ends. The farmers are all paid off, and they all convert their premises to places to produce synthetic and vegan food, and there's a load of cash being paid out, and so this goes on for a while. And
horribly believable, Jason, with
yes,
what's going on with farmers in this country being bribed to get off their land, really.
So then the economy starts to crash. So for example, I mean, I wrote this earlier this year, just to so I'll just read you a small paragraph. So all of this took place against the backdrop of a growing financial disaster. Most of the Western world, already reeling from the after effects of the earlier pandemic, simply went bankrupt. Inflation spiraled out of control, as did interest rates, rendering all currency worthless. Starvation was starting to look like a real possibility. And then it becomes really authoritative. So the next thing is they come for the cats and dogs. So keeping pets is illegal, and they come and take away all of the people's pets. Now you can imagine what people love their dogs, don't they? So people that fought back are just sort of beaten and dragged away, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And then suddenly salvation comes out of nowhere. So this new global relief movement, and this is where they have this thing with the Venn diagram with the three circles, like on the old ATV logo. So it's a symbol of, it's the World Economic Forum, World Health Organization, and World Bank come in on their and step in, and what they do is currency and property ownership is abolished for all but the rich, and they introduced this new social credit system. Everybody is given work building these huge tower blocks, which are all identical, which everybody lives in the city. So they don't want anyone in the countryside. And to answer your question, the reason why people accepted it all was because they were being fed and housed, and otherwise they would have died of starvation.
So they were knocked for six, that, as you said, are reeling from the last pandemic. It's horribly, horribly dark. And although it is sci-fi, it's just so close to reality. It's
Yeah,
it's really frightening.
but a lot of the people that are living in it are quite happy because it's like a game to them. It's like, um, it's like, oh, if I could just get up to a 7, because everybody's rated from 0 to 10, and most of them are in the middle. So it's like logarithmic. So
They're
only
in their own video game,
yeah,
aren't they?
yeah, they are. So the elites are the people 9 plus out of 10, but that's not 10% of the population. It's a tiny percentage because, like I say, it's logarithmic. Now the ones that are in 9, they are allowed to still travel abroad. They are still able to eat meat. Have all the things that we always had, and they would be probably the equivalent. A lot of them would be people that sort of the professional footballers, influencers, celebrities, and the idea is that your common man would be aspiring to get up there, but
And
it's
would there
impossible
be
to do it.
competitions like the X Factor, where
Yes,
you could, like all the Hunger Games maybe, but yeah, more X Factory, where you could become one of the, you could become a 10 or a 9.
yes, but there's a thing called the social lottery, which
Uh,
you get tickets for. So it's like the national lottery, but you can't buy them, but you get them for. So I just create a few scenarios. So there's something about I just picked a country at random that something's happened in Ghana, and everybody is wearing a if you wear a Ghana badge on your clothing to show your support, you not only do you get an increase in your rating, but you get a couple of tickets into the lottery. So every time if you do any of these things, you go up. But it's harder, you see. So if you are, the lower you are, the easier it's to go up. So it's quite easy to go from 5 to 6, but but to go from 8 to 9 is almost impossible.
yeah.
So
But there are enough people to go from that, just to give people that bit of hope to keep them
yeah,
motivated,
and
probably.
you have to behave quite badly to go below 5. But once you're below 5, you aren't allowed in a lot of different types of public buildings. So you can't go in certain restaurants. You could go in sort of down market ones. So she went into London, and so some areas of London are still sort of fairly similar to how they were before. So she goes sort of down to Soho and places like that, and she finds restaurants that are advertising in the window, we take people under 5, and so she goes in there, but the food is absolutely dreadful. So people are inspired to to move up the system.
This is horribly
Uh,
close. Give us some hope.
yeah.
Tell us about this group that Lauren finds,
Okay.
this Zealander type group.
Yeah, so there's a character. Her name's Seema. She is a British-born Indian journalist who appears in as a minor character in some of the earlier books, and she was sort of working for the BBC when all this kicked off, and refused to go along with it, and sort of got kicked out. And to cut a long story short, she found a few other people, and they live out in the countryside in a sort of commune where they're outside of the system. Now they they do keep some meat. They've got lambs. They bake their own bread. It's quite hippie like in a way. They sort of sit around the fire singing songs and stuff like that. And surprisingly, they are allowed to get away with it because two reasons. One is that the meat that they produce, they can sell it on the black market in London to people that can't get hold of it. So they're sort of tolerated because they're helping the people at the top to some extent. And the other um, thing is that they are painted by the media as living in a horrible lifestyle. So everyone has to watch TV. That's one of the things you have to do. It's on in the room all the time, and you've got the equivalent of sort of Good Morning Britain pumping out the propaganda. But it's the idea is if you go and join these people, you'll live in poverty. They're all in rags, and they're sort of pictured, like sort of ragamuffins, and it's like, why would you ever want to do that? But the reality is that they have a reasonable lifestyle. But when Lauren gets there, she's sort of she sort of questions that, and she thinks, well, you're getting away with it now, but they may come for you eventually. So they're sort of having to sort of think about that.
It's really, it's such a fantastic weaving of a story. I mean, I would honestly recommend everybody goes out and buys all of your books
Yeah.
immediately and reads them, because yeah, I'm going to start from scratch with all of them, because I find it just really entertaining and dark but humorous as well. And
Yes, well, that is one of the things I should have. Cause it does sound like I've just written a really terrifying tale, but my books are always been my intention to entertain with them, and humor is a big part of it. So, you know, and keeping it real, real people, it's the conversations that characters will have in my books are exactly the sort of conversations you would hear if you were in the pub or just living real life. And I've got dark characters, lighter characters, people that believe in different things. I don't have a political agenda. I mean, presenting this social credit system, it's not painted as being totally evil or horrible. And I have people there that within the story, like the girl in the coffee shop that she talks to, who are quite happy with it. And I imagine there would be people who would be quite happy with it if it happened.
oh, more and
Um,
more, I think. I mean, if you think it's
yeah,
just an extension of the benefit system, really, isn't it?
yeah, they'd be very excited. Though, you could see someone like go, look, I'm up to 6.97. If I, tomorrow I'm going to go down and go to this and be seen there. And if I get enough likes, I'll be a 7, and then we can get a ferry to France for our holiday this year instead of having to go to Wales.
Yeah, I can see how it would be so appealing to so many people. And yeah, that it would just be this rebellious core, probably
I think
30%, who
I
would go,
think
no, not for me.
I think you and I would probably be living in the commune.
Oh, I would definitely be living in the commune.
Yeah,
Maybe if I was 90, I wouldn't be. I don't know.
no,
But oh no, I can see the appeal in some ways. The appeal that you don't really have to think about anything, or but then if you wanted to break out and do something different, that's where you would really find the chains
yeah.
begin to bite.
But see, yeah, it's interesting. Now, of course, Lauren was only visiting this place, so she spends a little bit of time there, and then moves on to the next part of the story. So we don't ever get a sort of resolution to what happens to the people there. But I am toying, like with a lot of my books, I'll develop an idea and I'll come back to it at a later date and give it a full book. So, and I think, how can I connect it together? Of course, this is a different universe, but it does take place in 2029, which is the year that the what we talked about earlier in global cooling happened. And I'm sort of thinking about it. I was saying, okay, so this is 6 months before that happened. What would happen to the people in this society if the same thing that happened in global cooling happened to this planet? I think they would fare a lot worse because they're all shut in these tower blocks. Everything runs off electricity. They don't even have supermarkets. All their food is delivered and automated because they're more or less told what to eat. I think that it would be a lot worse. And then I'm thinking, okay, what if Lauren came back and went back to the commune and warned them? They would probably have more chance of surviving than the people in the cities would.
Sorry, I'd muted myself.
That's all right.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Well, what you've done is given everyone a bit of a glance into
Yeah.
a future that is really almost upon us, isn't it?
Well, I hope not. I mean, I try to be optimistic, but when you look at the things that are said and what people are saying, it's so easy to imagine how we could end up in this sort of thing. I would, I like to think, like you said about your other half, talk about the technology, that it's further away than we think it is. But I think if we were sent 50, 100 years into the future, we might find something like that. Hopefully, not 7 years away.
I don't think it could really, I don't think it can last. I mean, if you look at, I don't know whether the energy thing is partly cock up, partly conspiracy. I think it's conspiracy, but I think they've cocked up their own conspiracy when it comes to the energy crisis, because how are they going to power a lot of these things that they want to be powered? If things are
Yeah.
going digital, you can't power things that are digital if you've got no electricity to power them.
Well, there's a lot of stuff, if you read into it, about the fact that the raw materials needed to make the lithium and stuff for batteries for cars, or I mean I mean, I know, there's a lot of pro and anti green feeling about using green energy. I mean, I don't think any of us would disagree if there was an easy, cheap, totally reliable source of green energy and we had unlimited resources to produce it. Most people would be in favour of that. But
Oh,
the,
completely. Solar panels on your roof,
yeah,
the
but
personal wind turbine that David Cameron, do you remember David Cameron saying
yeah,
every house should have its own wind turbine? Great idea. Yeah.
but the
Let's
problem the problem with it is that the infrastructure and the technology just simply isn't there yet. And
I don't, it might not even be a case of the technology not being that. I mean,
yeah,
my other half said it's not. It may be that a little bit like the oil companies switching to green, which is, let's face it, it's the same companies, isn't it?
yeah,
Maybe they're not ready for it yet. They haven't quite got all their ducks in a row
no.
to make that leap. So they're sort of telling us and moving towards it, but it's not all quite in place.
They're trying to force. I mean, generally, if you allow technology, since the Industrial Revolution onwards, to develop at its own pace, and people need to research and experiment and invent and come up with new ways of doing things, it will always evolve, and that's why our standard of living is so high, but because it's been allowed to develop that way. But it seems that by setting arbitrary targets, like we don't want any petrol cars on the road after 2030 and all this sort of stuff, you're setting targets that can't be achieved, but you're acting as if they can, and that's what's creating the problems. I believe. I
I
mean,
think there's a tension there, definitely. And like Alphabet Cat said, that there is this theory that their technology, when they show you some technology, what they're really saying is, we've already got this out there.
yeah,
We're just giving you a little flavour of it now, but we've been doing this for like 50 years.
yeah, but I mean, even if it's all there, purely, creating the infrastructure to do things. I mean, so for example, cars were invented in, what, 1895, 96, something like that. But we didn't have the first motorways in Britain till something like 1958. So it's sort of 60 years between the invention of the car and it being sufficient people having them, and for us to build the motorway network.
There's
Uh,
definitely a lag, isn't there,
there
between
is. I mean, uh,
ideology and yeah.
uh, an analogy I like to use is, it's almost as if, say, because before we had the car, everyone used a horse and cart. And if you went back to, say, 1920, you'd probably still see more horses and carts around than cars. But it's almost as if, imagine that it's 1896, the car's been invented. Okay, this is an extreme case. Great, we've got the car now. Let's go round and shoot all the horses because we don't need them anymore.
Yeah, there is a
It's
bit of
it's
that.
like it's like
Yeah,
you need that transition and crossover. So
exactly.
my fear is that we're trying to run before we can walk, and it's going to cause a lot of problems for society. And of course, it doesn't help when there's this need to be on message. So if you say the sort of things that we are saying now, there is an element in society that will absolutely castigate you for saying them.
I'm hoping that this, the stage that we think they're at, which is running before they can walk, I'm hoping that that is what's going to prevent this from happening at all. I'm hoping enough people are starting to join a few dots and think, hang on a minute, this is there something not. I think a lot of people sense that there's something that isn't quite right, but their heads are still too in what James Dunning Pole calls normie land.
Yeah.
So there's sort of something niggling away, but they can't quite turn their attention to it because
Yes,
the
though
other
I do
things.
I do feel I like you and I think we are at the right level, because we are because I think is also an element maybe of people that are so far down the rabbit hole, they've become too far removed from you need to be in a sort of central area where we are, where you can look at the different arguments, whereas it's like with politics everywhere else, you do get this element that the far left and the far right, who are so welded to their beliefs that they won't take a balanced view like we are. And I don't think extremists on either side of any argument help anybody.
No, they don't. And I've seen it in, do I call it the freedom movement? I don't really call it the freedom movement. People who are awake, people like us who
Well,
see what's unfolding and are trying to sound the alarm bell, a bit like oh god, what was she called? Cassandra.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, I called them libertarians in the book, because that's what the groups of us that meet up on Wednesday evenings. We're not particularly freedom fighters or revolutionaries. We just like to talk, freely about what's going on, and share ideas.
I could become a revolutionary if I was
Yeah,
pushed. Might have to.
we may have to. We
We
may.
may have to. Have you
Yeah.
changed your minds about anything? I mean, how were you down the rabbit hole before you started writing your sci-fi series, or have you found yourself more down the rabbit hole because of that and because of what's happened in the last couple of years? When did you sort of dive down it?
I've always been a bit of an outsider, as a person generally, and I've always sort of veered away from mass market ideas and music and anything else. I always wanted to look at alternatives. So it's not so much being down a rabbit hole, but I've always found, like, say with music in the 80s, rather than listening to the things that were in the top 10, seeking out indie bands and other ideas. I mean, the sort of bands that would graze the bottom of the top 40. And I suppose it was with my sort of outlook on the world in general. It always seemed that the more something was being pushed, the more suspicious of it I became, if that
Oh,
makes
that is so
sense.
me. Yeah, like films or
Yeah.
music or anything like that. Yeah, I'd go completely in the opposite direction.
Um,
Facebook, mobile phones. I was
it,
always a late adopter.
it's not a case of being contrary for the sake of being contrary, but I guess the whole idea of groupthink and oh, you absolutely have to watch this, or it's the final of Big Brother tonight, everyone's going to be watching it, and I'm like, well, I'm not.
I think
And
it's some kind of instinct, isn't it?
yeah,
Because when everyone's throwing themselves off the cliff, I kind of like to stand back and watch
yeah.
what's going to
I,
happen.
I think what really sort of spurred it on for me was I saw over quite a long period of years that debate was being shut down on certain issues. It sort of maybe over the last 10 years, I would notice that there would be an issue. I mean, we've talked a bit about climate change today, so let me just focus on that. Certainly, there was the business with David Bellamy, and David Attenborough. So it was to do with when they were sort of talking about global warming, and that you used to see articles in newspapers and programs on telly that would discuss you know whether this was happening, if it was happening, and you would hear alternate voices on the subject. So David Attenborough might say that global warming was a real problem, and it was getting into more and more of his TV shows. And whereas David Bellamy was taking the opposite view, and he said there's no real proof that that this is happening. Now, I'm not saying for a moment which of them is correct. What I kind of objected to was the fact that the people who didn't go with the prevailing orthodoxy, i.e., David Bellamy, for example, effectively never appeared on television again. There was this period, this time where you were no longer able to have the different views, and people that didn't have the right views were being shut down or cancelled, as we now come to see it. And I started to notice more and more in television programs. I mean, Attenborough is a good example, that there just seemed to be these messages being put into everything. And I'm not just talking about, climate change. I mean, I haven't even said on this podcast what my opinions are. I don't need to. I mean, my problem is not with the fact whether it exists or not. It's with the fact that we're not allowed to discuss it. And I just sort of noticed this, and you watch any program. I mean, I don't watch soap operas and things like that these days. I haven't for a long time, but I've seen clips on the internet of people shoehorning these things into these programs.
Oh, I
So
found that as well. I used to listen to
yeah,
Radio 4 a lot, and I used to really like Woman's Hour. I mean, it's called Woman's Hour. It's a crap name, but they did used to have some really great sort of features on it. And then I started to notice everything. I mean, the last time I ever listened to it, it was the food program as well. I used to listen to the food program, and there was a food program about sugar. I thought, this will be interesting. It'll be all about, medieval times and
yeah,
sugar. No, it was all about the slave plantations. And I just thought, oh, for God's sake,
yeah,
this is a bit of light relief. It's a bit of interest. And instead of focusing on sugar and what we can do with it and where it can, all of that, it was all about, and that's what it became about every week. It was like she said, it was shoehorned into everything. Slavery
yes,
was
and
shoehorned into every single food program.
yes, and always with this exact same message that you can't deviate from. Now, I don't want to put politics into my books for that reason. I mean, my mission has always been to entertain, and I like to read the reviews that say people have loved reading a book and they really enjoy them. And yes, we do touch on sensitive issues. So obviously, I've had the climate stuff, um, and most people do seem to appreciate that. But I do have characters who have opinions on things, and there's this thing that's staying on message. I mentioned about the soaps and that sort of thing. There seems to be this orthodoxy now that if you're going to have a character express the wrong opinion, they need to be a really dumb, uninformed
A bit of a
character.
thicko, or right wing, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. So now I don't think the vast majority of people are interested in any of this. So I mean, I've my book's been around long enough now that I've got thousands of reviews, and hardly anyone ever picks up on any of this stuff. So the last book I had out has got something like about 300 reviews, and only one of them picked me up on, or well, basically claiming I had a political agenda. So in this particular book, I have it's set in 2024, so 2 years from now, and the COVID business is mentioned. So in some cases, in quite a light-hearted way, though apparently that was not the right thing to do, because this reviewer was very angry that I mentioned it at all, because it was a sensitive topic and people could have died from it, and I shouldn't even be talking about it at all. But I had this scene. So I've got this pub landlord called Kent, who is a bit of a buffoon, quite honestly. He was always brought in to be that sort of character. And he was moaning about when the pub shut down for the lockdown, because of all the beer that he had to throw away. So the joke was that he had all this beer left over, and he was trying to drink as much of it as he could. And his wife was going, "Oh, you should have seen him." But he had like hundreds and hundreds of pints of beer. He couldn't possibly drink it all himself. So he ended up having to throw it down the drain And his wife was, oh, you should have seen him. He was crying as it went down the drain. It was a humorous scene.
These people have no humour, though, do they?
And
Really?
no. And then later on, I had another character. So Kent, the landlord, is a bit of an idiot. But then I had another character later on who was going on an airplane, 2024, 4 years after COVID, bemoaning the fact that they were still having to wear masks on airplanes. Now, the reason I put that in there was because, after 9/11 and the business with the shoe bomber and all that sort of thing, we
Yes.
had all these airport security things brought in, like this
Take
business of
shoes off.
not being able to taking your shoes off, not being able to take liquids through, and all
Yeah.
this, this with a holiday crowd going off to Benidorm or whatever. And it just so this 20 years ago, as a reaction to that, and we're still doing it.
I know. Yeah.
So the point I was trying to make with that scene was not that I was, I wasn't making a protest about the fact that people were wearing masks on airplane. The point I was making is that once these things come in, they can become permanent. But
Yes.
the reviewer took a lot of issue with what I said. But the fascinating thing about it was she didn't mind that the pub landlord had been complaining because he was a stupid character. But the character complaining about the mask. Well, I just read you the I'll just read you the paragraph because it says it already. So it says, entertaining fare, but the lockdown skeptic, COVID denying views of the author, which do suit some of the characters, like the crude and boorish pub landlord very well, start to grate when open-minded, smart characters start doing it. So it's like you can only do it if the right people are saying it. So it's fascinating. But I mean, I've no intention of self-censoring anything that I write, just to for these reasons. Though, I mean, there's another subject I can talk about. Have you heard of the term sensitivity editor?
Oh, good grief. No, I was going to ask you actually about, have you felt any pressure recently? Because obviously it's on audio. It's also, you can also buy print copies
Yeah.
through Amazon. I don't know if there's anyone. Can you buy them directly from you as well or not?
It is possible, but I don't have anything set up to do it by website. So
Yeah.
generally, it's done, sort of by hand if it's people I know. That's that sort of thing. But mostly, it's done through the internet.
So have you not had anyone even sort of whispering, going, "Oh, Jason, you better know the knuckle on this one"?
No, that's the thing. I mean, like I said, I've got thousands of reviews, and I could count on one hand the people that have picked up on. I mean, this one I've just read out here is the only one of that nature.
Well, that's really good. How have you escaped?
Well, the thing is, it's made out to be more of an issue, I think, in many cases than it really is. Now, I get various emails from people that I publish my books through, like Audible, who do the audio books. They send out these emails. I'll come on to that. But as in case people don't realize, I self-publish rather than going to an editor, and that was a deliberate decision at the start, because I do use an editor, but only from a grammatical, a proofreading point of view, because I know that editors will hack things to pieces. There's the you can't say that, you can't do that, or that doesn't work. But of course, in the general publishing industry, they want things done to a formula. So if you look, everyone knows what a romance book looks like, or a crime book, or a humor book, and they're expected to be pigeonholed into these categories. Now, I didn't want that with mine. I see them as a little bit sci-fi, a little bit of humor, sprinkling of romance, not a lot, because that's not really thing.
Very much adventure, yeah.
Adventure.
To me as adventure.
So,
yeah.
But effectively, if you're reading one of my books, it's a unique style to me as a writer. It's a sort of melting pot of different ideas thrown in, made into a plot, and it's very distinctive. And I never even approached a publishing house, because I knew and some people would probably still be doing that. I probably would still be doing it to this day. I wouldn't have got a book deal.
And you've sold over 100,000 copies now as well, just off your own back, which is amazing.
Yeah. I mean, without all the marketing, advertising, I do it all myself. The only people that I employ are a proofreader and an editor, largely for the grammatical stuff, and a cover designer, because I can't draw or design books to spend my life.
How do you get the people to do the audio books?
Okay, that's done through a site called Audible, where there's a pool of producers and actors who want to record books, and then there's us who want them to record, and you effectively you find them on there, or they find you because they audition for your book, and then you come to a deal for how you're going to split the profit. So you can either pay them up front, or you can do a royalty share.
Because that brings me to the fact that you've got different people reading the different novels. Is that deliberate? Have you deliberately chosen different
yes
readers?
Well, I did. I thought, should I have the same person? Though I liked the idea of having different people doing it, because they're all keen to promote their own work as well. And I thought having sort of lots of different narrators all pushing the books would be a good marketing thing. I mean, the guy that did the first one, he wasn't sadly he wasn't too well actually at the time, and he was sort of on the point of retirement, so he wasn't able to do any more. So I then just sort of auditioned people for each one, and took different people as I came along, really. And the quality of the people on there varies a lot. So
it does, but they've all got their own sort of unique, a bit like the books, they've all got their own unique way, haven't they? Have you sort of interviewed someone for a particular book and thought, actually, because do you do it as your book, as a book comes out? Obviously, that's the way you do it. But is there anyone you've bought back because you think,
yes, there are so
well?
There are some that have done more than one.
Yeah.
So the lady that did book 4 and 5, they're kind of like a pair, those books, so it made sense to do that. And the guy that did book 11 was so good. He's probably, I called him back for book 12, and he's a lot of experience. That guy, a lot of them are actors, so he'd been in EastEnders and Absolutely Fabulous and various other shows. So they're not nobodies. So you do get people that
they're proper actors. Yeah,
you do get people on Audible that are basically students in their bedroom chancing their arm, but you can tell.
Any actors that you know who you would get to read one of your books?
Well, I don't know if they're listening. They should be. I keep telling people like Simon Roberts and Michael Livesley that they should do this, because they are wonderful. They got wonderful voices.
They have.
It's not a difficult thing to do. If you do it on a profit share, you can spend a week or two doing the job. It goes up there, and you'll be getting some royalties every month. It might only be a £5 here or £10 there, but it soon adds up.
And you get your name out, don't you, as well?
Yeah.
And it plays to their talents as actors.
Yeah. So sometimes I'm looking for a specific thing. So, for example, one of my books, Happy New Year, is written in the first person by a woman from Liverpool. So I needed to find a woman with a Scouse accent. So, and I did find one. Though that brings me on to another part I was going to talk about before. That I talked about sensitivity editors, and one of the big things that's been going around about recently, both in the acting and the writing world, is this concept of lived experience. And there's almost this theory that people like myself shouldn't be writing characters from different sexes, sexualities,
Oh,
different
that's
ethnic background.
ridiculous.
And
And then they complain if you made all your characters male and white.
yeah, well, yeah, this is the thing. I mean, I've had people from all of those different things in my book. And I have explored some of those issues, and nobody has ever complained about anything that I did.
Yeah.
But the idea now, and this is the thing that's the big thing I mentioned before about sensitivity editors, is that if you're going to have somebody from outside your lived experience, you need to get somebody to
Oh
and these
God.
sensitivity editors are springing up everywhere. So if I
Oh.
was if I was going to write a female lesbian character, I need somebody. I need a female lesbian to read the book and okay that and make sure I'm not using the wrong language. You see, I find that very odd. And I've read these things. We've all seen these sort of things. I read up on a few articles. Things like there's all this sort of advice in there. Things like what words you use in books. Rather than use words like mother and father, use say parent
Oh, for
and all
God's
this sort of stuff. And I don't take any notice of it because I
no.
just don't think. I mean that the vast majority of my readers would ever be bothered about
Well, the sort of
that
I can
sort of
imagine
thing.
the sort of books that those people read are so politically correct and boring anyway
Yeah.
that Jason, it's 3:15.
Yes, blimey, it is.
I
We've
know.
whizzed. Have we missed?
We've whizzed through a lot, haven't we?
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to talk about? I was going to briefly mention the project that I've been working on with Michael Livesley.
Yes, do. And I was going to say as well that your books lend themselves so well to being made into films or a TV series.
Oh, that is something that I would really like, and we have explored that. I did have a guy. We were going to do the time bubble. We even got as far as auditioning some people to do some of the roles, but it fell through because of finance. I mean, trying to do a film yourself is very difficult.
It will happen. It will happen.
Yeah, and
It
I
definitely
had
will.
3 different people from America show interest in one of the books a few years ago. Again, never came to anything, but the fact that they showed interest is promising.
It's
But
like
yeah,
an
I mean,
open door to push, isn't it?
yeah, it could be an epic series. I guess it just has to fall on the right person's desk, really. But you would think the number of copies that I'm sort of shifting, it will get to the right person eventually.
Well, I don't know. I think you have to kind of make a bit of luck yourself in this
Well, you
regard.
do.
But anyway, carry on about this
Yeah.
project with
Well,
Michael
this is the
Livesley.
thing. I mean, you make contacts, don't you? And I mean,
Yes.
Paul and Michael are a prime example. So, Michael, he approached me a year or so back, saying that they'd come up with an idea for a couple of characters, and they were sort of thinking that maybe they could try and make a film. And they're actors, but they hadn't maybe got the experience of putting a full sort of novel or script together. So I came up with a few ideas. Michael and I sat down and sort of write this script, but we didn't manage to sort of get it off the ground. Like I say, getting funding to create a whole movie is a huge undertaking. So what I've done in the interim, or what I'm working on now, is I'm sort of converting the script we wrote into a novel, which won't be part of the Time Bubble series, but I'm going to be putting that out hopefully early next year. And so I'm writing a novel, but I'm going to give Michael obviously a writing credit for the dialogue that he wrote. And my suggestion for him was that he also sets himself up on Audible and records the audiobook, because then he can earn some money from it as well. And not only that, it gives you a credit, it showcases what you can do, and by having that out there, the chances that somebody might pick up on it and then consider making it into a film increases.
It's just a nice collaboration as well, because you've
Yeah,
both contributed and you're both sort of getting it out there in different ways, or
yeah. It's
vocally, or
it's an out and out comedy. So based on these 2 outlandish caricatures, which were sort of written with Paul and Michael in mind as the people that. So you know how Paul is on nice
Yeah.
things.
Yes.
So this character is very
Mr. Cross.
much. Yeah. It's kind of I could only ever hear his and Michael's voices in my head when I was writing the dialogue and the story. But it's been proving to be quite a momentous task because I've tried to convert a book into a script before, and now I'm converting a script into a book, and it is an incredibly in-depth thing to do. The differences between the two are amazing. I mean, there is so much more that you've got to put into the novel, because when you write the script, you're mostly writing dialogue with a little bit of scene setting, but
and the dialogue is normally there, isn't it? So you're literally just taking it out with a bit of direction in brackets. But yeah.
But you're relying then on the director and the actors to convey all of the emotions and the feelings, and you don't get any of that in a novel. So you've got to you've got to put the characters' motivations in. You've got to and I realised that it was what the script we wrote was 25,000 words, but this is going to be 2 to 3 times the size of that in terms of number of words. So it's quite an undertaking, and I'm hoping that it will be well received. So I'm going to publish it myself, and I'm hoping again that Michael will be able to make some money out of it, because I'm going to try and get I can get the sort of paperbacks and things printed up very cheaply that then that he can sell on. But it's good for both of us. I loved working with him because we've got a similar sense of humor. We've got a similar background. This is why I love Nice Things, which is their show. But we've got completely different skill sets. But the two skill sets welded together have produced what I think something quite special. And I'm hoping we'll be able to work together more in the future.
That'd be amazing, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Jason, where can people find you?
Okay, so I have a website, which is very easy. It's jasonayres.co.uk. They can find me if you Google my name or the Time Bubble, which is the name of the first book. You will get stacks of results. So I'm not difficult to find. I'm on Twitter, and I'm at the Time Bubble on Twitter. I'm on Facebook as well, but I don't really use it a great deal these days. So Twitter's probably the best place to go. And in terms of the books, if you're interested in audiobooks, they're sold through a company called Audible, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard of, and also through Apple on iTunes. And you can also buy them on Amazon. Now, what I would say, and I gave you this tip as well, which I discovered a while ago, that audiobooks are pretty expensive. I don't know if you buy them, but they are sort of £15 or £16, which is a lot.
I used to buy them on CD,
Yeah.
but it's a bit difficult to play CDs these days.
Yeah, but the audio books, if you buy them from Audible or Apple, they're sort of £16. It's quite a lot. But I've discovered this sort of workaround that if you go and buy the Kindle editions on Amazon, now I know that's not everybody's cup of tea, but I mean this is just a tip for getting things cheaper. You can buy the Kindle books for £1.99, between £1.99 and £2.99. But once you own the Kindle edition, you can add the Audible edition normally for quite a small amount, so £3 to £4. So it's quite a much cheaper way of doing things. But I would say go to the YouTube channel and have a listen, because the first half hour or so of the books is on there for you to listen to for free, or you could read the first 10% online for free as well using the Look Inside fixture. So there's a try before you buy, as they say. And the other thing you'll find on my YouTube channel, and I've just finished a series of this, is my own podcast, which is called The Time Bubble. Now, I've done 15 episodes of that. I say I've stopped for the moment because I've got so much on that. As you know, doing podcasts is quite time consuming, but I'm hoping to do some more next year, or possibly something different. So go and have a listen to that. And of course, you were on one of those episodes with me, so I'd recommend going and listening to that.
Also called The Time Bubble, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
So yeah, but effectively, the Time Bubble is my brand. So and it's quite an easy thing to remember, and it's quite easy to find. It's got the sort of the yellow. If you find a little yellow circle or logo, that's the cover of the first book that it's based on. So they say branding's an important thing, and I think it is, because you know the covers that I've got on my books.
Yes.
Before I had those particular covers, I had a sort of quite haphazard, sort of lots of different types. And I thought, it doesn't look that professional. So I got somebody to sort of rebrand the entire range so they all look the same, but they're all different colors with different images, but same fonts, branding. And after I launched those, my sales more or less doubled. So it does show, if I say to anyone, if you are putting books up for sale online, make them as professional as you can. You want the people looking at them to not even realize that they're self-published. You want them to look as good as if they come from.
They don't look. I mean, I've not
publisher.
seen a hard copy of them, but I mean, you can't. You wouldn't just. I've started to look for them now in every bookshop I go into, but generally you'd have to. I mean, they are available in hard copy.
You can buy them on a lot of online. You can get them hard copy, and there's a lot of online booksellers where you can get them from. So if you are one of these people that doesn't want to buy things from the big tech giants, you can find them elsewhere.
And I guess if you went into an independent bookshop and said, "Oh, I'd like to buy this book by Jason Ayres," they would be able to order it, would they?
In theory, yes, because I've got it in expanded distribution. So in theory, you should be able to go into a bookshop or library and do it. But don't quote me on that, because I don't know for sure. I know some people have managed it and some haven't.
I'm going to test that theory out in my local
and of course, if you're anyone that we have these Wednesday night drinks. So I took a job lot of all 12 over to Worcester a few weeks ago for a guy in our group called Rick, who's a big sci-fi fan, and turned up there with this box of books. And so it was great, really, because I'm not one of these people that would, you do get these people that take their books to the pub and try and flog them to people, but because he was buying them off me anyway, and I was with this whole group of people, it was a real opportunity to sort of show them off without making it too obvious. But some people, I think, they don't always take you quite seriously, because one of Rick's comments when he got about the puzzle, blimey, it's a real book. What were you expecting? Some printed out photocopy or something?
Well, I think self-publishing a few years ago was everyone was a bit sniffy about it, weren't they?
Yeah.
But it's actually become it's been a real competition now with the what are they called? The established publishers.
Yeah. Well, there's two. They are still sniffy and snobbish about it, but for two reasons. Basically, the people who are traditionally published look down their noses at self-published, and also the publishing houses don't like it either. But the fact is, they don't like it because we're doing well. And
it gets around the gatekeeping nonsense, doesn't it?
It gets around the gatekeeping. And, I have access to real-time sales data, so I can see exactly what I'm selling at all times. I get a very good royalty rate, that published authors can only dream of. And I'm totally in control of it's, I'm effectively running my own publishing business, and I'm in control of every element of that. Now,
you can't be cancelled.
No, that's exactly, yeah. So I'm immune to that. And you hear stories from some published authors, real horror stories. So, they get a royalty statement once every 3 months or something that's printed out. They have absolutely no idea what's going on with their books, what the publisher's doing. The royalty rates are really poor, and they might get an advance, but they don't get any more money till the advance has been paid off. So it's, the advance is literally that, an advance. So if they give you, they might say, oh, they've given me a £10,000 advance. If you never make that in royalties, which most won't, then you won't ever get any more money, but they'll own the rights to your book forever. So nothing else you can do with it. So it's really not worth it unless somebody's making you a mega offer. I'd say, I'm sorry, if Penguin or some big company came to me and said, "Oh, it's amazing," or Netflix or whoever, and we'll give you £1 million, or I'd probably be a fool to say no, wouldn't
Oh
I?
no,
Because
don't turn your nose up at that.
no, because I could take the £1 million, be secure for life, and then my name would be so big through the publisher or Netflix that then I can then go and write another range of books on my own,
Or
self-published,
set up your own publishing company to rival theirs.
and carry on earning money anyway. So,
Yeah.
I say this: it's not just publishing. Anything that anybody creative does, whether it be music or filmmaking or art or whatever you do, if you can be in control of your own work and your own destiny, it's the best feeling.
Yeah.
It really is, and it's the best way to do it.
Oh, Jason, on that note, because it's 3:30 and your children are going to arrive at home any moment, shall we wrap this up? I believe we're going to be catching up with each other in real life next month, aren't we?
Yes, we're trying to sort something out for Michael's birthday, aren't we?
Was it not a surprise?
No, it's not, because I had to tell him because to get him
to be there.
So no, it's not a surprise. I've spoken to a few of the chaps, and most of them are up for it. So I haven't really done any more about it since we last spoke, but we will try and get that sorted. So yeah, that's the time. If anyone wants books off me and we're meeting up, that's the time to let me know well in advance, and
yes,
and I'll get them ordered. So and then I can sell them to you much cheaper as well than if you were buying them on online, because the cost price for me is a third of the retail price.
Wow, that's a pretty good saving.
Yeah,
especially if you want to buy the whole set for a Christmas present for somebody.
Yeah, well, that's what I did. Like with Rick, it's like we sort of split the difference.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Great. Oh, it's been really fantastic chatting.
Yes.
And again, do go and get the series because they are so interesting, and it's a real romp through time and back.
There's so many different stories. I try to make all the books different and explore ideas that hadn't been done before. I mean, we didn't even get a chance to talk about some of the later books, but you haven't read those yet. But have a listen, to those previews, and
definitely
you'll be like,
have a listen to the previews
and see what you think. Okay.
Lovely. All right. Well, I shall see you soon, and thank you for coming on. And I'll put some links in the postscript thing, whatever it's called. I'm very untechnical. All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.